everyone. Welcome to the Thing with ABD podcast, a podcast about almost anything at the intersection of analytics, digital, and design. I'm your host today, Michelle. With nearly 20% of unemployment rate in the United States and nearly 2 million of Canadians lost jobs during COVID-19, I could not imagine how difficult and devastating for some of our workers who recently lost their jobs, but still in need of legal advice. When we think about legal services, some of us might associate that with being expensive or inaccessible. At the beginning of this month, there was one particular project caught our attention. There is an open access tool called MyOpenCourt that is powered by artificial intelligence, offering basic legal advice such as, determine the termination, compensation fairness, or access whether the worker is considered as employee or independent contractor. So today I have invited the creator of the tool, Dr. Samuel Dahan from Conflict Analytics Lab at Queen's University.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm Samuel Dahan. I am a lawyer and a law professor, and my interest is in data-driven conflict resolution. So the idea behind that is to build systems, technologies that helps negotiators, lawyers to find a way to negotiate with more efficient strategy.
Okay, interesting. Maybe you speak more about, MyOpenCourt and what does it do and what inspired you to create such a service like that?
So MyOpenCourt is mainly inspired by one observation. So the observation is that most people, so I'm talking about probably 80% of the population, and most companies, small companies as well, will never have access to legal services because it's outrageously expensive. We're talking about areas of laws that are not super complex, but fairly complex, so you need to hire a lawyer. And the problem is that with these issues, we're talking about the example of wrongful termination. Your employees decide that they don't want to work with you, but you think it's not so fair, so you want to go to court. It's going to cost you about maybe $20,000 to $30,000. Do you want to spend that kind of money? Probably not so much. And even if you want to spend that kind of money, even if you win, it's very likely the legal fees will be higher than what you actually earn. So what's the point? No point. So we realize maybe if there's a way to at least let people know whether they have a case and whether we can find a business model that is sufficiently attractive for the lawyers, the mediators, or anybody else that is plugged into MyOpenCourt, that could be an interesting experiment. First tool is a classifier. It helps users to determine whether they are an independent contractor or an employee. So it's a big debate. A lot of companies are listing their workers as contractors, even though the law is not so. The law is actually smarter than that, and they should be classified as employee. And if they are classified as employees, they have a lot of rights that come with this title, like minimum wage, vacation pay, and so on. So the second tool is a termination compensation calculator. So there's a few, tools out there, but we wanted to test again, we want to experiment different models. So first, our tool is based on natural language processing models, and we're able at least to give basic information to the users, like whether they're entitled to get compensation, whether their layoff is illegal, whether there is a dismissal for cause, things that are obvious for lawyers. But not so obvious for the average. And in case, and that's true for both tools, in case the system says, you know what, you are an employee, or you know what, your employer didn't offer any kind of severance, any kind of compensation, you're owed X amount of money, X amount of dollars, and then here is a potential. Talk to one of our legal partners. And these partners don't charge any. The users can hire a lawyer at no cost. So the lawyers will have committed to an initial consultation for free. And then if they think the case has merit, they can take the case to court. They can send a demand letter. They can settle. And eventually they will be able to, they can negotiate with the client. So contingencies, basically the lawyer gets paid only if he wins the case.
Absolutely. I actually played around with the tool and I try to figure out how much would I get paid if I being laid off, and I can see, oh my God, there's a wide ranges, right? And then I think this is really kind of something like information empowering tools to kind of incentivize people to like, and, ask more questions rather than, that's okay, I'm gonna move on, right? So I think it's definitely a big part on awareness of just making sure you understand your right, as a basic citizen. So I think from that perspective, it's pretty remarkable.
I mean, we're just a bunch of researchers. You see the team of the conflict analytics is just a bunch of geeks, that are interested in writing papers. And then we realized that, we reach out to a couple of public institutions or even, tech companies, they're all law firms, and it seemed to be interested in building that system. So we're not trying really to reinvent the wheel here. We're really trying to provide a democratization of justice component. But also there's a second component, which is also making the life of the lawyers a little bit less painful. And I think that in some kind of a screening process for the lawyers. And on the other hand, I mean, the people who are in the industry who are doing already a very good job what they do, and maybe that can help them to select, work with the right cases.
I want to maybe start with asking you some questions about like legal analytics. And I think to someone who is maybe outside of a field, it still sounds pretty foreign, right? And of course, I did some research about that. It shows like application of data analysis techniques with like within the field of law and to improve efficiency, gain insight, maybe realize greater value. But those are really vague terms. So if you can kind of describe to me, help us understand what legal analytics does, and maybe there are different type of legal analytics today.
Look at it in the way like conflict analytics is a method or process of resolving disputes with data-driven tools. By data-driven tools, we're talking about also negotiation data, mediation data. And why we decided to call the lab conflict analytics and not legal analytics lab is because we want to target legal data, so past cases, in order to make an informed decision about a hypothetical cases that would be similar to past data. But also we wanted to call it conflict analytics because we think that in many areas, at least the area of interest of the lab, like customer disputes, employment disputes, trademark, personal injuries, these areas are, I would say 90% of the cases, 90% of the times they're resolved through negotiation. So for us, just making predictions or more like making a data-driven decision, which is what lawyers have done, since the creation of the concept of a case law. You find a right precedent, make a case and make an argument and say, actually this case is very close, so maybe we should apply the same solution. So it's just pretty much, data analytics is just doing what lawyers have done like over the last centuries, but now we're using better methods and better technology to process huge amount of data and to extract the right precedent more quickly than we used to do it.
So I guess it's more around kind of a precedential behavioral analysis. And I guess how to get the data, there's a different separate set of questions, but assume we have that, and then we can kind of combine the knowledge and expertise across different lawyers, especially in negotiation and dispute resolution. That's a very interesting, and I think that's definitely kind of different from like how everybody think about legal analytics. We immediately think about maybe solving this highly confidential cases. Those judges might be biased. Try to identify some pattern there, and I think that was the first thing jumping in my head. But now I can see there's a lot of things kind of even outside of a courtroom.
So in order to calculate the judge, the Supreme Court said in the 60s, you're going to take into consideration the age, character, also the position of the employee, the length of service, and availability of employment. So these variables are very objective when you think about it to determine how old someone is, the length of service. But what is not objective is how judges apply these criteria and what weight each criteria, is received, and how this translated to an actual number. And we cannot find really a real consistent pattern. There is some kind of a pattern, but to come up with the exact number, impossible. Because judges have discretion, and it's great to have discretion. data analytics will help us at least to identify, for example, in our system now, what happens is once the user press the button, very good at that is finding exactly similar cases. But the problem is that for an employee that is 40 years old, he is a manager, he works the same companies, we find 3 cases and they all come up with different outcomes. So none of this is going to be up to the lawyer to find a compromise. So there's always going to be, especially in common law systems like Canada, whereas in Europe, it's a little bit more like driven by civil code. It's a little bit more scientific, but here there's always going to be a lot of discussion, given to the judge. And I think it's great.
I think, based on a lot of people understanding of law, and maybe you're just going to go deeper of the whatever things you were talking about. I think a lot of people might think, oh, law is law. Law is highly rule-based, right? But in reality, there's a lot of things open for interpretation. And analytics, on the other hand, and I think is very much like probabilistic. And we recognize patterns, and we basically use a pattern to determine whether it is a highly probable case or not. So how do you see these two being connected?
I think that was true for very simplistic statistical method. Data science has now techniques that can grasp more nuances, and the idea, even if it's probabilistic, is just a suggestion. I think the idea is, as long as we don't believe this is the ultimate truth and the judge have to follow that probability of that suggestion, that prediction, I think it can still be helpful. The idea is just to make sure that we're not understanding this as some kind of a universal truth.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we think of using algorithm power predictive analytics to strengthen the justice systems in North America? And I know you also have a lot of experience across the globe, and I think you will also serve for the European Commission. So maybe you can kind of share with us on your view, not only in North America, but also other part of the countries and the globe.
Yeah, so I think the problem in North America is very similar to the problem in Europe, and I think it comes back to the first observation that led us to build MyOpenCourt. And the first observation is that there's no real universal minimum legal service, that like the same way where we think it's very obvious that there's a minimum wage. Obviously, if we spend a lot of hours, if these like that kind of research is tedious and therefore expensive, obviously the cost will be higher for the consumer. So with data analytics and other technique, we can help lawyers to identify, to be more efficient at their research. We're in the business of finding a way to bring down that knowledge or that prediction or that probability or that suggested prediction to get an idea of, like, in a sense, whether they should, it's worth it to go to court. And I think that's where data science, in my opinion, will really improve the North American or the European justice system. Once we will be able to democratize that technology or that kind of research for everyone, and make sure that everyone, if they have a legal question, at least, the very least they should do is like, is there a case or no? Just a very simple question. And it's a binary question. It's a very simple classification task for a data scientist.
Next question is definitely on kind of replacement of lawyers. And I think a lot of people are kind of talking about, like, now we have a robo-advisor for financial services, and would it be possible to have like robo-lawyers? What do you think about that? And then maybe there's a new kind of interaction model between, robots versus humans, right?
Right now, AI systems have very limited ability to understand what we call counterfactual reasoning. So just basically causation. Computers are not very good at that. And law is all about causation. If we think that we're going to create a robot lawyer, maybe AI has to be a little bit stronger in terms of understanding causation. So that's one thing. However, I think that would be very interesting for our purely theoretical research. We've gathered a lot of legal text. Improve the ability of our AI to understand basic legal concepts. We want our models to rely not only on task-driven models, but also a generalized system who has a better ability to understand legal concepts.
Okay, and then I have maybe one more question regarding to kind of your personal interest in this space. And I think something you really, really want to see in either conflict analytics or legal analytics, whatever you want. What do you think would be the most interesting part for you in the future?
We're really looking at making a very specific data-driven negotiation system or predictive negotiation system for a specific industry partner. That would be really amazing. Potential industry partners like the banking sector, the hospitality industry, or the airline companies that are dealing with millions and millions of complaints. I think what we would like to do is help them to build a MyOpenCourt system for them. The problem is that we're lacking data to build a very good negotiation system. For many companies, when there's a dispute with the customer, he's lost. And a company that makes an effort to resolve disputes efficiently, I think can make the customer, even more loyal than he was before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You actually raise a really good point of kind of changing the perspective, right? Maybe back in the day, you're looking at customer complaint and dispute as something negative, as something hurt your bottom line. But if you have invest enough effort into it, maybe, inviting a team like yourself and then kind of change the environment to be like, hey, this is a great opportunity for a company to actually generate additional revenue.
If we're able to look at that data, there must be some successful precedents where companies have been able to resolve a bunch of disputes successfully, and we can learn from that. It would be very interesting if we look at the very specific subcomponent of dispute resolution, which is probably a little bit more complex, but there's a lot of room for improvement there.
For sure.
And I would say, if you give me, and again, it's an intuition based on my discussion with potential industry partners. So it seems that the banking sector, at least the banking sector in Canada, they're very interested. They've been using AI for a lot of projects. A lot of tasks over the last years. So mortgage approval, credit card fraud, detection. So I think, and also now they're investing in a lot of projects and ethical AI. They're trying to make their automated decision-making processes a little bit more explainable. So I feel like this is an industry that probably may be more open to that kind of research, and especially, they probably have a lot of customer complaints every day. They already have very well, I'm thinking about several banks. They have a very good customer complaint system. You send a complaint, someone responds to you. But it's very much, I would call it in French, we have this word that I cannot really, I don't think, it's very artisanal. It's like the work of a craftsman. It's very much like intuitive. You're like, oh, let me think, you're a nice guy. I'm just going to find, but it's not based. I don't think anybody in the customer service department has a list of past cases. Yes. So I think that would be an area where I think that's the dream research project for the lab.
For sure. I love your kind of analogy of a craftsmanship of, in law, because it is, right? It seems like you have followed a kind of a structural ingredient, proportion, but then at the end, it's still a matter of someone's magical hand and touching it and shaping it. So I think it makes perfect sense to kind of think about the two things at the same time. Well, I think we are probably in the end of the conversation, and thank you very much for your help. And I think I personally learned tons from this conversation, and totally kind of align with you in terms of a lot of points of, now we're really in the position of maybe raising awareness, encouraging a positive change. That maybe encourage other industrial participants to share data, to kind of building a better kind of research capability for the many generations to come. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. I very much enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye. Bye.